The Sugar Conspiracy. 1950. The obesity rate among adult Americans is 12%. By 1980, it's 15%. 2020. The obesity rate among adult Americans is 42%, with no sign of slowing down, and may hit 50% by year 2030. The line, relatively flat for 30 years, sharply shoots up starting in the mid-80s and has been continuing since. What happened? What went wrong? Is this the result of Americans simply sitting down more? Or do we do more exercising now than we did 20 years ago? Obesity is the most common predictor for every common mortality, particularly the most deadly killer in the US today, heart disease, as well as respiratory disease, diabetes, stroke, and cancer. This is an epidemic and should be treated with such urgency. To understand the obesity epidemic, we must first go back to a critical moment in Western medicine in the 1950s. After the heart attack suffered by President Eisenhower in the mid-50s, the science community was looking for answers for the gradual rise in heart disease, the high prevalence of smoking notwithstanding. The two main theories established was that of, let's call it, the sugar hypothesis, pushed by John Yudkin, one of Britain's top nutritionist academics, who concluded from his research that excess sugar intake causes heart disease and obesity, and the fat hypothesis, pushed by American academic Ansel Keys, which came to the conclusion that heart disease is caused by cholesterol buildup in the artery walls, and that this cholesterol buildup must be caused by eating cholesterol-rich foods such as saturated fat, whole milk, butter, eggs, and meat. Ansel Keys, being the more aggressive, charismatic, and politically savvy of the two scientists, was able to influence scientific consensus through institutions like the American Heart Association and the National Institute of Health towards his fat hypothesis, even though his actual scientific studies to support the hypothesis were unsatisfactory upon examination. The low-fat movement is born. Though Ansel Keys' data collection between 1958 and 1964 for his most important 7 countries study seemed to be oddly selective on which countries he studied, curiously excluding France and Germany, which had the 2 highest rates of consumption of saturated fat in all of Europe, but did not have the high rates of heart disease. In short, the main evidence Keys used to support the fat hypothesis was bad science. After the damage was done, the lead researcher in the 7 countries study, Alessio Manetti, went back to the data and found that the food that correlated the most closely with deaths from heart disease was not saturated fat, but sugar. But this was too late. The fat hypothesis had already become the consensus among the scientific community, under which the United States Department of Agriculture published its dietary guidelines from the 60s through the 80s, which evolved into the infamous food pyramid, published in 1992, which incredibly instructed the public that the most fundamental element of their diet should be bread, pasta, cereal, and rice, all extremely high glycemic index foods. Americans followed the USDA's recommendation, and between 1971 and 2020 reduced their consumption of fatty red meat from an average of 150 pounds per year to 108 pounds per year, while simultaneously increasing their consumption of chicken, which is a lean meat, from 40 pounds per year to 96 pounds per year, and increasing their wheat and grains exponentially. See, when you eat carbs, the body breaks down or converts most carbohydrates into sugar glucose. Glucose is absorbed into the bloodstream, and with the help of a hormone called insulin, it travels into the cells of the body where it can be used for energy. The more you eat carbs, the more this hormone, insulin, needs to spike to convert the glucose into energy. As this mechanism gets abused by excess glucose, such as what this insane diet suggests, it stops working and the glucose is not converted into energy as it should be, and instead stays in the body as fat. This process is called insulin resistance, type 2 diabetes, and prediabetes, and is the reason for the obesity epidemic in America today. This official USDA food pyramid has since been updated, but has not changed in its general premise that is built upon the fat hypothesis. Ansel Keys, in his time, was addressing the heart disease issue. The obesity epidemic didn't really take off until 1980. So it seems like not only was the fat hypothesis wrong about the causes of heart disease, it seems that the obesity epidemic was a secondary effect of this bad science. A very, very bad secondary effect. One that now kills approximately 300,000 people every year in the US alone. In 1992, the obesity rate was 20%. In 2020, it's 42%. How can it be any more clear? The food pyramid was wrong. The fat hypothesis was wrong. Ansel Keys was wrong. But Keys and his following are not only to blame. There is now a long documented history of the sugar industry in the US influencing the scientific community. Early warnings of the link between heart disease and sugar consumption by John Yudkin in the 50s were downplayed by the Sugar Research Foundation, a Washington, D.C. industry advocate, essentially a lobby now known as the Sugar Association. In 1965, they sponsored a research project into heart disease, which conveniently found that fat and cholesterol was the culprit. Many other studies, guidelines, and all manner of misleading propaganda have come from the sugar industry and their friendly lobbies in the United States Capitol, as you would expect from a $100 billion industry which stands to lose quite a bit if exposed as being the primary culprit behind the greatest health crisis humanity has ever known. This was the most cataclysmic conspiracy in human history, the sugar conspiracy. Cholesterol is not bad. Cholesterol is good. Red meat does not kill you. It makes you stronger. Fatty fish does not clog your arteries. They make you smarter. Eggs don't make you fat. They make you skinny. Saturated animal fat is not the worst thing to eat. It's the best thing to eat. Everything they said was wrong. In the 1950s and prior, Americans drank whole milk, ate raw butter, pork, beef, eggs, and they were perfectly slim and fit. How? Well, animal fat, as our bodies have adapted to eat, for the last 2.6 million years, unlike wheat, which we have only introduced into our diet in the last 10,000 years, and dwarf wheat, which is what we eat today, only 60 years ago, is the most calorically dense food, twice as calorically dense as carbs, more specifically. Because of this, fat very quickly triggers a mechanism in our body to stop eating. Fat is satiating. When you eat bacon and eggs, you don't get full. You get satiated. When you eat the same amount of bread, bagels, cake, you don't get satiated. Partially because you only took in half the caloric energy load, but more importantly, because our bodies have not evolved a trigger mechanism to make us feel satiated when we eat carbs like we have for fats. So people do exactly what you would expect them to do in this situation. They simply eat more until they are full, and then repeat a short time later because their body still didn't get the nutrients that it wanted, so it triggers the hunger mechanism again and creates this vicious cycle that almost always ends in obesity and diabetes. So paradoxically, eating heavier food that is more calorically dense leads to a slimmer, healthier body because you eat less portion size and eat less frequently. The obesity epidemic is only getting worse, and the only way to fix it is to undo the last 50 years of mainstream nutritional advice. Eat your natural diet. I encourage you to be as skeptical today of state-sponsored science in light of recent events as we should have been in the 60s and 70s when this disastrous plan was set into motion at the hands of politicians masquerading as scientists. Thank you for listening. For more information, please visit meetrx.com. Sources and citations in the info bar below.